Welcome to She Wrestles Truth and Grace group discussion. We invite you to join us in conversation where we wrestle with how to understand and change our culture through the radical truth, grace, and love of Jesus Christ. Our episode number 1 is about white privilege. And now welcome Susan Godby, our host.
Hello, this is me, Susan. Thanks, Stacy. We picked a big one, didn't we, guys, for our kickoff one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Exactly.
Let's get into it.
if we're gonna wrestle with big topics, we figured why pussyfoot around it. Let's just jump in and do it. And we might be talking next week about our favorite brand of shampoo, but instead because we went too big. But this is the goal of what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to not avoid topics that so many people are struggling to talk about. So we thought we'd try, white privilege here. So when we say white privilege, I know just even saying that phrase, when I told my husband, we're going to talk about white privilege. And I think he did one of these, oh, wow. He's like, that's a big one. He's like, you really want to talk about that?
Yeah.
We do. We do want to talk about it. So let's real quick. Let's just say, when you first say white privilege, what comes to your mind? What's inside? Knee-jerk reaction, each of you.
I mean, my first knee-jerk reaction when I first heard it was, the word privilege you kind of bristle at. If you're not somebody who has had things handed to them. And so for me, that's one thing that I just was like, what do you mean? I'm not privileged. But I've learned a lot since that first thinking of it.
What else? That's great.
Yeah, I'd agree that when I first heard it, I was offended. And then I started hearing more and more people talk about it and people that I respected. And so I started reading things and I started listening to other people and asking questions. But I think I still wrestle with it a little bit. Like I get it, but then certain aspects of it, I'm like, well, is that true? And could there be a better name for it?
Right.
Sometimes I think of it as majority privilege.
It's an interesting thought, majority privilege instead of white privilege.
Mm-hmm.
It does kind of go back to kind of how you see yourself a little bit and how you grew up. When you talk about privilege, you're talking about, where you came from, what we were raised with. So can you tell me a little bit about, your experiences growing up a little bit, kind of share with us a little bit about how you were raised, the kind of racial dynamic you grew up in. Tell us a little bit about you. Who wants to jump in and go first?
Go ahead, Stacy.
So you're wanting to know what kind of atmosphere I grew up in?
Yeah.
I grew up in
a pretty white.
That's what I was going to say.
Environment. What about you?
Yeah, very white suburban area, and it's so white suburban that I can tell you exactly the one African American person that was in our school. So.
Where are you from, Stacy?
I grew up. I'm talking junior high school. Was in Marion, Iowa.
Okay, Iowa. Okay.
Suburb of Cedar Rapids, and Cedar Rapids was looked at. Now I moved there, but Cedar Rapids was at the time looked at as a more dangerous area and something to be feared because it had
because of racial problems or
not problems, just more diverse group of people living in Cedar Rapids.
I see. Okay. What about you, Roberta?
I we moved around a little bit when I was younger because my dad was in the Air Force. And just being an Air Force brat, like I was exposed to different races. But pretty, like for my junior high and high school, I was pretty much in a small town because we had settled to one place, and that small town didn't have any Black people. And it was small town, like the big town we went to was, still not a big town at all. But we had the Air Force base there. And so there was a lot of diversity that just came with that. So that kind of helped a little bit from it being just like every other, or a lot of other small towns in Illinois. But yeah, definitely around a lot of people who hadn't had any experience with other races. So, kind of saw both sides of it.
Right. Jeanette, what do you think?
Well, so I grew up between Kansas and Missouri, back and forth. And some of that time was in Kansas City, and I was living near Kansas City. And I think that the first time I realized that I was white and somebody was Black and that was different was I was walking home, and some young Black man called me white trash. And I was like, what is that? That doesn't sound nice. Like, I don't know you. Why are you yelling at me? But then later, like maybe 5th grade, there was a young Black boy in our neighborhood that I hung out with and played with. And so one time there was a group of us playing, and the boys from the neighborhood got inside this big box, and somebody in the box was flipping us off through the hole in the box. And my aunt said, well, we know that it was this one boy. And I said, how did you know who it was? And she just looked at me like I was an idiot. And it took me a while to realize it must have been the Black boy that was doing the flipping off. And so she didn't, but I'm just not into details. So I think wasn't looking for that, or I didn't notice that. Then in high school, I lived in a little town in Kansas, and we only had a couple of Black kids in the town, but like somebody moved in and he became class president. Like I think we were all at an age where we were like eager to show that we're not prejudiced, and yay, we have a Black person here and we're going to celebrate him. But I'm sure he felt really lonely because it would be hard, no matter who you are, to be in the minority.
I remember a time, I think it would have been older elementary school or middle school. I remember learning something in school about racial problems or segregation or some of the civil rights movement of the 60s, I guess. So this would have been like mid to late 70s, not too long after that when I was doing that. So I remember thinking, oh my goodness, I'm so glad that I'm a part of a generation that's figured this out,
Yeah.
We're not going to deal with this the way, people before us have. We're better than that now. And I remember that feeling. I remember thinking that.
I do too. Yeah.
So there was a movie, Old, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner?
Mm-hmm.
And so, gosh, I can't think, Katharine Hepburn was in it, and Sidney Poitier, I think. And so the gal brings a Black man to dinner, and the dad, Spencer Tracy, is so upset. And kind of remember my mom trying to teach me, like, even though probably rest of the family had some racial things going on, she always tried to teach me to not be that way. And yet I can remember hearing the words and thinking the words for myself for a long time. Well, it's okay for Black and white people to get married, but they shouldn't have children because that would be so hard on the child. You look surprised, Roberta. Did you never hear
I just, I hadn't heard that one, but I also in my childhood heard adults who would say, yeah, that it's okay, they're great people, they're fine, but we're just not supposed to marry that way interracially.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, who says?
So-
But that's why I think, Susan, it goes back to, we were like, oh, thank goodness we don't think that way anymore. We've got this thing figured out,
Right. So we fast forward to a few years ago, and we have riots in Ferguson around here in St. Louis, and we're confronted with this again, that this hasn't gone away. It's obviously still here. And I think that was probably the first time around that time period that I started hearing the phrase white privilege brought up. And I'm like you, I remember the first time I heard it thinking, I do not agree with that at all. I am not privileged. Nobody has ever given me anything, everything I have, I've worked for, and I've worked hard for it. And it felt insulting. So is that, you guys have already kind of said that's how you kind of took it as well. So, but I guess if we're going to talk about it, I think, like you're saying, I think you said, Jeanette, that it's not exactly the right word. If I don't want to criticize people who have coined the word, or I'm not saying anything like that, but it's privilege has this connotation of you've been handed something.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And most of us don't see ourselves that way. So
Yeah.
I looked up a definition, really geeky thing to do. Academic meaning of white privilege as people are using it today: systems, cultures that benefit white people over non-white people in some societies. Do y'all agree with that? Do you think that's a good definition that I've found?
Yeah, I think I was reading stuff about too, that like bias is different than maybe racial barriers, and it all is kind of wound up together, but that white privilege has a lot to do with systemic racism, which is another thing that, like, I had to learn, what did that mean?
Right. What do you think that means? What do you mean systemic?
Well,
Even though I just read the same thing.
so somebody else could probably explain it better, but I think, so jump in, but I think that so systemic would mean a system, and typically it's a governmental system, but it doesn't always have to be, that helps the majority, in this case white people, get along ahead in the world more than people of different colors. So it doesn't have to be just black people, but
Mm-hmm.
people of all different colors. So like, here's one that we have a code that schools are funded by where you live, by property tax. And so if someone lives in a poor neighborhood, they're going to go to a school that's not funded as well. And typically, they're not going to do as well because of this educational system. And so then it's a system that propagates itself.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yep.
The area is never going to get any better if the schools aren't better, is what you're thinking there.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the argument about that, I think, that I've heard a lot, and I probably used to think it, is, well, don't go to that school. Like, move out of the neighborhood and go someplace for a better school. But now I found out that that's not always so easy.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Exactly.
I'm sure you guys, Roberta, can you explain why it's not easy? Or
I mean, I guess, yeah, from what, I've seen with different areas like that, is that, you may not have the money to move. Like, think of the, the down payment that's required to move. Do you have things to actually move, the resources to move your things? And, like, that's part of, like, I think the white privilege, and I don't know if this actually, if being able to move fits in that category or not, but maybe. And, we just take it for granted that if we didn't like a school system or whatever, or something about where we lived, we have the choice and the means, but not everybody, not every white person, if you're, in a you know, if you're a poor white person, that might be hard for you too. So, but yeah, I think that with the systemic racism, I think it's that, you know, there's these biases and things that we didn't even realize as white people that we have these biases and we don't even realize it. And so that when that's in a system, then it becomes this thing of racism and each individual not realizing it. For instance, one of the things I saw was there was a study, I was trying to remember the name of it, but where they looked at how managers were looking at resumes, and like a large percentage of resumes, if the name sounded a little less familiar to them, less white, the resumes were put to the side. I'll think of what it was. It was on a show, and then they talked about it some more, and we can share it on social media. But that's interesting. Like, and that person that's reviewing the resumes may not even know that they're doing that. So
it's a bias that they've learned that they're not, maybe not overtly doing, but then the system is set up in a way for someone that's not white to get that job.
Yeah. Yep.
Like you said earlier, if I could go back to that, Jeanette, you said it was majority bias. Don't you think, you know, the person that's doing the hiring, for instance, we're always going to pick, at least I think this, we're always going to pick people that are like us. It's human nature. You're going to pick people that are like you because that's who you trust. So it takes a conscious understanding that you're doing that to work against it, I think, right? It takes kind of understanding, this is what I'm going to do naturally. I am going to prefer the person that looks familiar to me, that name that looks familiar, that college on that resume that looks familiar, you know, that area of the country, you know, I know this person. So, and to set that aside, a lot of people don't want to do that. Why not?
They don't want to do.
They don't want to, they don't think it's important to set aside those biases or to set aside that feeling. I'm going to go with who I think is right for the job, no matter why I think it, and not dig a little deeper to understand why they're choosing who they're choosing. If I take that scenario out a little bit, do you think some people, everybody wants to do that? Does everybody want to recognize that bias in themselves?
No, because everyone says, I'm not racist, I'm not prejudiced, I'm not, you know, nobody wants to think that they are. It's not until we start talking about it and listening and thinking about it and being self-reflective do we think, okay, yeah, I guess I have done that, or I could do that, or until you bring it up, like tonight, Susan, I'm not in a position to hire somebody, but I definitely want to surround myself with people that are like me. I like a lot of different kinds of people too, but if I'm doing something and there's somebody I am familiar with and there's somebody I'm not familiar with, I'm mostly probably going to pick the kind of person I'm familiar with, not even thinking that that's keeping me in a bubble.
Yep. It's human nature. So we have to fight it. You know, we have to consciously, like you said, Susan, say, you know, tell ourselves to do differently, you know, to think differently. And I don't, like your question was, you know, do you think everybody wants to do that? I don't think everybody wants to do that because, you know, that's almost like saying, well, yeah, like giving yourself the tag. Well, that would mean I'm a racist. So, you know, or that there's something wrong with you, you know, in order to admit it and try to do differently. You have to say, well, I was doing something wrong before, and I don't know, that's hard. I think it's hard for me too, you know, like with anything, it's like, I thought I was doing the right thing. So that's the first hump that somebody's got to get over, is that, okay, maybe I wasn't, but I didn't know, you know, maybe I didn't know better, but now I do, and let's do different, you know?
So to just go with, stop saying the assumption of it's not me and think it could be me. What is it that I don't know? Here's something I learned this week, just kind of doing some research about this. So like we all took a class with our old pastor, Ray Washington, and he taught us a lot of things. And one of the things that he taught us about that I had never thought about, and now probably everyone's heard of it, but it's like skin colored Band-Aids are white skinned colored Band-Aids. And for a long time, flesh was the color of a crayon that was a white person's color. And so some of those kind of things. And so I've been aware of that. And then the pushback I think of sometimes is that, well, if the store has 85% of the people coming in that are white, they're going to cater to that white person. But I think that there's a recognition that there's people that you don't just think of yourself, think of others. We're in a supply and demand economy. But here's the thing. You go into the store and you go down the hair care product, and there might be part of the hair care that's called ethnic hair care product. And I think that I thought that was okay. Like, I know, I thought that was okay. It was like, okay, now you know where to go. Great. Yeah. But if you're being called out for your ethnicity, like if I lived in Iraq and I went into the hair place and then they were like, white people's hair products, I don't know. I might be a little like, okay, this is weird. I don't know.
Right. So that is the essence of white privilege. We can walk into a store and not have to think, I hope they have my kind of hair products here. Like it's a assumed reality that it's going to be there. We don't even have to think about it.
Yeah. So I was reading, go ahead.
Oh, I was just, I was just going to say, so like kind of like Jeanette said, isn't that just catering to the majority? And the system is always going to benefit the majority.
For sure.
So why is that wrong?
I wonder why you call out that it's ethnic.
I'm sorry, what?
I said, I wonder why you have to call out that it's ethnic and put it in one spot, for one thing.
Why couldn't you, because why can't you say for dry hair or, for curly hair or for, whatever it is, why can't it be about the trait, not the ethnicity? Mm-hmm. But it's just something that somebody thought, oh, well, I'm going to be really good and provide something to a minority and we're going to point it out for them. Right. Not even thinking like me that might be offensive.
Well, and I think how long did it take in the United States for us to even recognize that Black people don't have the same kind of hair as white people? So, they had to get products in a very specific spot, probably talking in St. Louis somewhere, if they could at all. I don't even know. And again, we didn't have to know. So that's kind of the systemic thing. We didn't have to know. So it wasn't even on our radar. But I get your question, Susan. I understand that you're saying, why is it that big of a deal to? I don't think it's that big of a deal that it's only a partial amount. I don't think that that's it at all. I think it's all the other things that created that situation.
But just to realize, like, what are some creative things that we can do about, like, to be aware, to question things, and to keep learning, because every time that we discuss this subject or take a class, I learn something more. Like, oh, okay.
So Jeanette, just to kind of push back a little bit, why should I care about the minority? So why should I go out of my way to change things in my society to suit the minority?
Well, I mean, my gut reaction is one, being a Christian, and two, how we take care of the minority. The minority is going to be considered weak. I'm not saying that the minority is weak, but they don't have the power that the majority has.
Yeah.
And if we don't stick up for the people who don't have power, what does that say about us? Like that, I think that that's the command, one of the commands of Christ: love others as you love yourself, and to be interested in their needs and want to learn more and do what you can to promote that.
Well, America is very much a pull yourself up by your bootstraps and do it yourself. You want a better life for yourself, make a better way for yourself. You do it. Do you think that has helped or hindered us as a race of people, as a country? Has that been a good thing or not so good?
Hasn't been a good thing because that reality is our white reality. That's not a reality of someone who doesn't have the means, who doesn't have the opportunities, who doesn't have, who just wasn't born into a space in their life where that's even a possibility.
Right. That's two people
Don't have, to be honest, they probably don't even know, not, but I won't say they. We are assuming that there's even a knowledge base everywhere that you can even do that, that's even a possibility.
I'm kind of torn, honestly. Like, I think I can see where it's bad, but I grew up in that era that, like, come to America and you can do anything, and people do. And we celebrate those stories of people who have. And so I still want to believe that it's possible. Like, if I really put my nose to the grindstone, I could make anything of myself that I wanted to. I like that dream. But it has hurt us in that we celebrate the few people who've done it, and then we turn it back and say, why are we giving handouts? Why are we helping when you can just do it? But there's a good question. Why can't they do it? And so we've talked about this a little bit. World War II, when the men came home, there was a GI Bill that helped them get low-cost housing and job training, and it was a big boom to our society. And yet Black people could not get into the schools that they wanted to get into. They had to go, if they got into school, they got into all Black schools. Not saying that they didn't have the best teacher, but they were just pushed aside. Lots of times they didn't do that because they were already from a family where they had to have a job. They couldn't do that. Then what happened in the big cities, in the South, they just refused housing. But in the North, we did redlining. So Roberta, can you explain redlining?
I know somewhat about it, and what I understand is that there was basically an area that was a red line was drawn on the map that said we're going to sell and give loans to people of color in this area, but over here we're not going to do it. And it was just a known, I think it was just predominant in the industry, you know, for the agents and for the bankers and, you know, all throughout the industry. That's another systemic thing, like you said. So yeah, they didn't have that opportunity either,
Yeah.
even though they also were GIs, you know, they had went and served.
Yeah. And so there weren't homes available to them because they weren't in the red lined area that was deemed this is a poor area. And so also you can't put a grocery store here, or you can't do this here, or so suddenly you're stuck in a neighborhood where there's not a lot of employment. And then if there's not a car and there's not a bus system, you can't leave that place to get a job. And then more and more different things happen. People who supposedly were trying to help did things that, if you look back, you can see that it made things much worse. And then you're stuck. So, Roberta, you've been serving down in one of the poorest neighborhoods in St. Louis. And where do those people go to the grocery store?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't know. I've only been a couple times, but I mean, yeah, they're without cars, and I don't know where the nearest grocery store is. So they have to rely on the, you know, getting with someone else, or, you know, the kindness of other people to even get groceries.
Yeah, well, I know that there's a convenient mart there that charges exorbitant prices.
Yep.
And if you can't drive, that's where you go. And they don't have necessarily fruit and vegetables. They have, you know, junk food.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so how do you tell that person, get a job, pull yourself
Pull
up?
yourself up by your bootstraps. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely when we say pull yourself up by your bootstraps, we're assuming that the starting ground is at the same place for
Level.
everybody. And it's very, very much not. Some people are starting way farther back. And just because, you know, my grandparents, when they got off the boat, had one experience, it's very different from somebody else who's, you know, coming to this country, who got, you know, certain people groups were preyed upon on the docks. You know, they were just looking for them to, you know, take advantage of people who were immigrants to the country, and because they didn't speak the language the same way, like my ancestors came from Wales, you know, they spoke English well enough that they could get a job, maybe had some money when they already came. And the same thing has still, I think, held up today. There's still some people that are just starting farther back because they haven't had that history of family behind them. And that's, I think, is that where white privilege, that's where the privilege comes from. It's not so much a financial privilege, like I got to go to the country club, you know, I was raised in that kind of a situation, but that my color hasn't hurt me.
Well, actually, wealth is part of it, though, because such a larger percentage compared to population of white people own homes.
Yeah.
And that gives them quite a bit of safety, a place to start, something to kind of get their kids, they can help their kids get a car, or they can help their kids go to college. So then that just kind of perpetuates itself. And then I think it's like a big circle, because here's this poor community that's been redlined, that we've made these people live in, that they can't, I don't have a car, I can't get out. Now I've learned that I don't know a different way. I go to a poor school, I'm not getting any help, and there's a lot of crime ends up happening there for a lot of obvious reasons to me. So then when I drive by, I'm afraid. And so I, in turn, start thinking, okay, if I see a lot of people who aren't white in this neighborhood, I'm getting a little nervous, because I think there's so it's this whole thing inside of me that I'm like trying to fight, like what's true, what's not true, and what, I don't know. So we live in St. Charles County, Missouri, which is pretty white, not totally. There's a lot of ethnicity. My grandchildren go to a school where there's a lot of different races, and that's really cool. But when you see someone of a different race walking down the street, what do you think?
I mean,
Well, I can
I
tell you.
think for the most part, I don't have a reaction that is negative or really anything different. You know, thankfully, I mean, because like you said, we have people of color that are in this area, but you're right, as far as like the whole, if there's a group, is that something different? And, you know, we know that it's, you know, that's racist to think that, but
What,
that's,
Stacy? You're gonna have to yell.
yeah, sorry.
I know. I gotta yell to get in there. No, I was gonna say that a long time ago, I was reading some stuff a lot of years ago, and I read something about microaggressions, and somebody mentioned, or I read that, oh, well, what do you think when somebody of color walks down the street? And the person responded, I immediately check to see if I have anything that it could be stolen. Like, is there anything hanging out of my purse? Is my purse zipped? And I was, you know, I was flippant about that at first. I was like, whatever, I don't think that way. And then I realized I do. Like, I don't, it's not like this, I'm fearful by any means, but it definitely, like, my attention is grabbed.
Yeah.
For no other reason than that is how I was brought up to think. Not by, I'm not saying by my parents, I'm saying systemically, I was brought up to think that it's likely that if a Black person is walking down the street, they're up to no good. That I think that's the, you know, what I would say was probably going on in my head. Not that I was fearful necessarily, but yeah, I didn't even realize that was happening in my head.
Yeah.
So last night we were at a talk where we were asked the question, are you a dog person, a cat person, or a bird person? And today I got to thinking about it because I had my granddaughter in the car and she said, oh, I hate cats, except for Tom and Jerry, which are my cats. I hate cats, but your cats I like, but I don't like cats because they scratch. And I said, oh, I don't like cats that scratch either. But I thought, where has she heard that? You know, like, where do you get that feeling that like I'm a dog person or a cat person or a bird person? Because if you grew up with that, you're more likely. And so there's a bias that's come in, but it's because of what you've learned, what you've been familiar with. And so we have to first recognize it and then challenge what we've gotten familiar with. And I don't know that we can ever necessarily get over some of the things that we grew up feeling, but we can fight that. I mean, when I see somebody walking down the street, I think many things, but I know one of them is, do you feel safe? Like, are you being hustled? Like, I want to stop my car and get out and say, yay, I'm glad you're here. That might be just as bad. I don't know. You know, I just, like, I'm so aware of racial tension and so not wanting it to be there and not knowing how to handle it.
And I just want to clarify one more time. I don't walk around going,
right.
Yeah.
No. It was brought to my attention. It was brought to my attention that there are things I don't even know that I'm doing.
Yeah.
No, that's great, Stacy. I think all of us probably can relate to that. And I am very glad that you shared that.
I'm really, just for the record, hating talking about all of this for a couple of reasons. Number one, I want to say, please give us grace for saying things that are going to sound horrible. Because
I know.
I offend 15,000 people by saying certain things.
Yes. I said they live there. And I thought, oh my gosh, what did I just say?
And then secondly, I'm looking at the panel of people in front of me, and good golly, we're a bunch of white girls talking about white privilege,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
makes me sad. Like
Yeah.
to go, ugh,
But you know what? I think that that's okay. I kind of struggled with that a little bit too. And I think when we talked about doing this, we were like, should we get somebody on? But so I've heard a couple of things. One is that Black people are getting tired of telling us. Like,
Yeah.
I keep reading, like, don't ask me. I'm not your educator. Like, go read something. There's lots of articles, there's lots of books. And even though I learned a lot from Ray, it was also a woman who's white who was publishing articles on Facebook and saying things that I respected that got me to thinking and wanting to know more. So I think it's okay. Obviously, we're not speaking from experience of being on that side, but we're speaking of experience on
How we deal with it, what we do with it.
Yeah, and I think that we're just speaking to what a lot of people like us, how we struggle with it. And I mean, yeah, and it does feel weird, Stacey, because I'm like, oh, poor us, we struggle with it. But they're the ones that have had to really struggle, but I feel the same way that, just talking about it and giving people grace to say, and I hope people will, like you said, to say the wrong thing and then just learn.
that's what I wanted to get out there.
Yeah.
very good.
I'll tell you another term that I really made me kind of step back and think about what I thought about it. It's not just white privilege, but it's when my daughter said white fragility. This term?
Yeah, a little bit.
There's a term for white people's inability to understand their world, their concept of their world and their society is different than how they perceive it. That they will push it away for any reason. That one was really hard to hear too, because I don't like to hear that I can't be that person, that I can't change, that I can't grow, that I can't learn. So I read a quote just out of a book I was reading recently. It said, the more something threatens your identity, the more you will avoid it. This was just this guy's impressions of, he was writing a self-help book. There's a certain amount of comfort that comes with knowing how you fit in the world. Anything that shakes up that comfort, even if it could potentially make your life better, is inherently scary. And he was just talking about, how to go out there and get that next job, why we go pursue that next job. But it really made me think about what we're talking about here. How do I understand? How do I take a good look at my world around me and see if I'm really perceiving it correctly? What are you laughing about, Stacey?
I'm sorry. Somebody's playing with my mouse out in the other room, and I'm afraid they're going to stop the Zoom. So I'm like, I need to go tell them to stop playing with my mouse. I was like, oh my God.
As long as they don't click on the wrong thing.
So, I'll be right back. Sorry.
So yeah, my son, I think's reading White Fragility. There's a popular book, right, that a lot of people are reading. And so it's kind of cool that this younger generation is reading this and taking it all in. And then they're trying to educate us. So what do you think about the way that young people try to educate us?
I feel like an idiot. I don't like it.
Yeah, I don't
I
like
feeling like I didn't know something, that I wasn't perceiving something correctly. I hate that feeling. I do push it away.
Yeah, I think the first reaction is
that's an immature stance. I hear myself say it, I hear the immaturity of, that's not me, not me.
Yeah, I think my first reaction is defensive. Like, wait, yeah, no, that's not me, but
Right.
it is.
Yeah. And don't tell me, I need to tell you the woes of socialism, and you need to understand what, but then what I think we've talked a lot about is that we're the adults, not that they're not adults, but we're the more mature people, and we can set an example of listening and asking questions. And so I will say maybe they're not always right. Anytime there's a big change, I think people jump off the deep end. You know, they're going to go way over here.
Way over, yeah.
And then maybe the things swing back. But if we're just trying to say, so let's say young people are way over here, and then we're like, no, I'll meet you here. It's still a lot of tension. So to ask questions and to be willing to learn and to listen to even some of those far out ideas, and be saying, well, maybe I don't know. Maybe there's something they know that I don't know yet. And that's a hard place for a lot of parents to be.
Yeah, it's really hard, especially with adult kids, because you've taught them what they believe and what is right and wrong and so on and so forth. So for some, I think it's really hard to see that. And I mean, and it's actually a good thing. You want your kids to come back with their own opinions and beliefs and be able to stand by them, but it's just not always natural. You know, it's a new space that you're moving into. And so, yeah, you got to be graceful, I guess, with each other. I mean, you were talking about words, Susan, and I think that we can use inflammatory words. I think we do it and then they do it too. And like, it's almost like you said, white privilege. If it had maybe been called something else, people wouldn't have such an adverse reaction to it. But just in saying that, I'm like, oh, I don't want to tell them, I don't want to tell people who are working against it that it's too harsh to say it that way,
But does change happen if you don't say something a little, I mean, I don't want to say inflammatory words, but sometimes the inflammatory words generates a response that we have to stop and think about, well, what do you mean behind that?
That's a great point.
It makes us, question, am I privileged? Because I was called that, am I privileged? And of course, my first thought is no, but yes, I am.
And who's defining that it's inflammatory?
Yeah,
I guess I feel it, Stacy. That's what, because of how I take it in, I call it inflammatory. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, I'm saying a lot of people do, but it's the majority that are going to feel that that's an inflammatory, unfair word or.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. And that's probably a good mark of a good sign that I probably do need to consider it.
Yeah.
Because if I'm feeling this kind of emotion about it, if I'm feeling this anger or whatever it is that I'm feeling, that's probably a good sign I need to examine my motives a little bit of why I'm feeling like that.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Something that I was wondering about, kind of in a different vein, but I remember Ray teaching us that people will say, I'm colorblind, and that was really actually offensive to him, because
Why was
you
it?
identify as I'm a woman, I have brown hair, I don't even think about the fact that I'm white. And that's another thing about white privilege. I don't think about the fact that I'm white.
Yeah, you don't have to.
But Indian people, Black people, Asian people think about the fact that they're that when they're the minority.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I think, so it's a weird thing that, like, on the news, I think because of racial profiling maybe, but they'll be hesitant to say, like, the assailant was 5'2", wearing a blue shirt, and they try not to say what race he is. They try to show a picture of him,
Mm-hmm.
whether he's white or Black, but they're not saying it. So they're going out of their way to not be profilers, but then again, they're not identifying something that's a very identifiable mark. But I do it too. I'll be like, that actor in the show that we just saw, he was the brother of somebody and he had on a blue shirt, but I don't want to say what color he is. And then I'm like, who am I offending somebody by noticing what color he is? Because actually, no, I'm not. Like, do you guys hear what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's hard to put words to that, because I think it all the time. It's not anybody's entire identity.
No, right.
So I guess in the context of, I understand what you're saying about how the news people are trying not to profile. That makes sense in that context, to not use a race when they're trying to describe, negative behavior, something like that. But
sure.
In the context of me describing a person, I guess it's how I would want them to know, and for me to know that that's not their entire identity.
Yeah.
So I don't need to say that black man.
Mm-hmm.
I could say all 500 other characteristics that describe that person, or just that really nice guy that helped me, or so I get the concept of what it is, but I just don't. It's like I fight with, when is it right and when is it wrong, or when is it offending, and when is it when is it offending, and when is it truth giving or life giving or affirming to them.
Right. Because I thought that, like, we're trying to say, I didn't notice that. I didn't notice that about you, but yet we do notice that about people, like if Roberta did something and I didn't know who she was, I'd be like that redheaded gal over there. So by not saying it, you're almost saying like that would be offensive to say it. So like, we're not going to say, oh, that fat person, we'll say, oh, well, they're a little on the large side. We're going to be polite because we're not wanting to be offensive. But by saying that we're not going to say that they're black, it seems like saying they're black is offensive,
Right.
But it shouldn't be.
Mm-mm.
But I'm still struggling with all that.
We're wrestling with it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And I also think that, like us, one person may say, I think it would be great if you define me as a beautiful black woman, if you're talking about me, or maybe not. Yeah. Who wouldn't like beautiful, but then another person might say, oh no, I don't like it when people describe me by my race, I don't know. Is that an individual thing?
Yeah.
And is that part of the problem? Is that we're looking at it as, I don't know.
Well, these are individuals here, when we talk about races as a group of people, but a group of people is made up of individuals and they're not all the same. So
yeah.
I've heard a lot of people, I'm sorry.
They can have their personal preferences, about what they want.
I was just going to say, I just saw a thing somewhere on the internet, a guy that was, it was a black person who was saying that they didn't appreciate the term white privilege, and that it was taking away from, it was like making him a victim, was what he was saying.
Yeah.
And
I can see that.
That's an opinion out there too. I don't necessarily agree with that or think it's the majority of people of color, but that can be out there too.
Well, anytime that we talk about any group, Valley Girls or, doctors or ethnicity groups or something else, we're making big assumptions and trying to lump them all into a group. And nobody wants to be lumped into a group because we are individuals and we are in a very individualistic nation and we want to be recognized for that. So it's going to take relationships for us to know.
I think you're right.
So as if we're going to kind of wrap this up a little bit, as we think about white privilege, as we've talked about this tonight with us, as we've done a little reading to prepare for it, tell me your takeaway from all of this. Because, and I'll share real quick, my quick little takeaway from it was the realization that my world is, how I perceive my world is not how everybody else perceives it. Just because I grew up in a certain way, thinking a certain thing and experiencing this country in a certain way is not what everybody else did. And I'll share just a quick little story of how I kind of wrap my brain around it a little bit. I'm trying to find a way to, this is not to say that this is in any way equal with the problems of the black race in America, but I'm left-handed. And so, and I have told my husband all the time, you have no idea what it's like, because you never even think about living in this world about being right-handed. You never think, am I going to be able to use these scissors? Am I going to be able to, am I going to have the tools available to me that I need? But I think about it. That's something that works into how I live my life. I have to think about that. Am I going to be able to do this? Not so much anymore, but when I was a little kid learning things, my mother couldn't teach me certain things, how to do certain things, was I going to be able to do the scissors and drag my hand through the ink, writing and things like that. These are things. And that was one way that I could kind of understand what it's like for somebody else who never has to worry about that in their life. So I bet everybody out there has something like that they've had to deal with that nobody else ever has to. They don't, no idea what that struggle is like. And that's probably similar, except that there were, the civil rights movement, I mean, that's people that was actively being oppressed. That's not the same thing as being right or left-handed. I'm not trying to say that at all. So that was just kind of my little takeaway was that. And when I thought about, as a Christian woman, what is my response to this? All I could think was, Jesus spent his entire time, everything he taught was trying to shape your thinking into something else. Almost everything he taught was, you're thinking this way, think of the Sermon on the Mount. Mm-hmm. You've been taught this way, but I say it's this way. He was constantly trying to get us to take a different perspective on how we were currently seeing things, into shaping it into more of what he was wanting for our world.
That's really good, Susan.
Yeah, that's a great point.
That you're really like that. Like you're really and then everyone we meet, you hear this a lot. You don't know what somebody else is dealing with. And we just tend to think that everybody's like us, and to realize that everyone's not like us. No one's like us. Everyone has their own whatever, not only characteristics, but their own story, their own background, their own difficult things that they're dealing with, that it's never even occurred to us that that's a problem.
Exactly. And I bet we all have one of those things that we can relate to and at least kind of understand what that struggle is like a little bit.
And to have grace for everyone else, because I don't know what your struggle is, maybe.
Very good point.
I don't even have an idea.
So what about the rest of you? What was your takeaway from this?
I mean, I through reading a lot and through the classes that I have done with Ray, and I just want to do more and more, because like you said, Jeanette, it's like every time I talk about it or I read something about it, like it just gives me a little bit more information, and then I can have a little more grace, I think, hopefully, but I still need a ton of it, but myself, but I do think it helps to talk about it and to you know, read things and listen to things that you wouldn't normally listen to also, you know, that definitely, you know, gets you thinking a little bit. Don't just go to where you've always listened or where you've always read and feel like, you know, and then you just stay in your comfortable bubble. So anyway, I try to challenge myself to do it. I'm not always great at it, but I think, yeah.
You took a step to educate yourself and learn a
Yeah.
little bit more about something you didn't know about.
Yep.
Good deal. Stacy, anything?
Well, one takeaway for me has been how easily I move in and out of thinking about this stuff. How if I want to close my computer and walk out and not think about, I don't know.
You have that option, don't you?
So, and I bring that up because earlier I said many, many years ago, I read this stuff. And then yesterday when I said, what's our topic about? And then you said white privilege. And I was like, I have nothing to, I couldn't form, I don't think I could form anything to talk about. And then I went, oh my gosh, I have, you know, read all that stuff and taken all those classes and, you know, felt like I was wrapping my brain around hard concepts for me to get and seeing a side of me that I didn't know existed. And then I just go, oh, I learned. And then I can wait until somebody asks me someday to talk about it. And then I can go, I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
So I think that was probably my big takeaway, and
That's good.
just keeping it in front of me.
Yeah, that was really good, Stacy. I similarly, in a way, honestly, sometimes I get tired of it. Like I'm tired of us talking about it all the time or thinking or having it brought up. I just want it to be done. I want it to be over. And that talks about my comfort zone. But I have a vested interest. I have a Black grandson. I don't, right now, everybody loves him. But when he's a teenager, is there going to be problems? Like, I don't know. But I do know that we've gotten better. So when I was saying, when I was young, not very many Black and white people married each other. And now that happens, I think, a lot. And TV has changed so much. So they try to make a very concerted effort to have different races on the team or on the show. And that's, you know, the Black guy's not always the bad guy. He's lots of time, he's the good guy. And so those kind of things are good for us. And it's good to see, it's good to say that we have come a ways, but also just can't get comfortable, and I can't get weary of it. And I do want to keep learning and growing. And I'm hoping that we get some either pushback or some enlightenment or some questions from this, because we're still learning and we're still struggling, and obviously we don't get it all right, but I'm so glad that I've got this group of gals that I can do it with, that you're not going to judge me, you're going to understand where I came from, and you're going to love me no matter what. And I wish that everybody could have a group like that. And I think we're hoping that we can be that group for people.
Well, this was good. I think this was good. So we're trying to learn. We're just wrestling with this truths and trying to learn and understand more. And so I really appreciate you guys doing this with us.
And if anyone has any comments, they can go to Facebook and She Wrestles Truth and Grace, and send us a message, comment on the Facebook posts, and we'd be happy to engage further discussion.
Yeah.
And I think we'll have some links to some articles that we've read and some different things.
Can we,
Yeah,
post some wherever we've picked our, information to read.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We'll put it, we'll
Yeah.
add it to it. So,
I've
and
seen
we'll-
a couple really good like illustrations of video and drawings that have helped me see it. I'm so visual, so it's helped me get
Well,
the
you know, too, when I was looking for stuff to put, some of it was just too out there in your face. Like, I'm like, okay, that's too much. Like, I
well,
don't
we
know.
have to take baby steps, right?
Yeah.
So
Mm,
we keep going.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll be back with another video soon, right?
Yes,
All right.
we
sounds
will.
good.
Stay
All
tuned.
right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.